Okay, the purpose of this video is to provide you with the answers from your homework last night so you can see if you did it right. If you're confused at all while you're watching this video, make sure you put a star or you circle what you're confused about so you can ask me later on. So let's start with our first chart. With our first part of the chart, we are converting from percents to fractions. So I'm starting with a percent and I'm going to a fraction. And we know that percent means out of 100. So I have my little percent symbol, and that means out of 100. And because it's 63%, 63 goes on top or in my numerator. So 63% written as a fraction would be 63 hundredths. Let's try our next one, 42%. We know that percent means out of 100, my little percent sign. So I'm going to put 100 in the denominator, and we're looking at 42%. So 42 goes in my numerator. 42 hundredths is 42% written as a fraction. Let's try this last one. Again, we have 145%, and we know percent means out of 100. So I put 100 in my denominator, and it's 145%. So I put 145 on top. So 145% is written as 145 over 100. We can also look at this and we can write it as a whole number and a fraction, because we know that if the number on top is larger than the number on bottom, that it's worth more than 1. And 100 over 100 is equal to 1. So I can write this as 145%, or I could write it as 145 over 100. Because instead of using this and as 100, I'm writing it now as a whole, because 100 over 100 is equal to 1. 100 over 100 is equal to 1. All right, let's try the next type of problem. For this one, I'm moving from a percent to a decimal. So I'm going to start with 16%, and I'm simply going to write this number right here, 16%. I know that I'm going to remove the percent sign and think about my decimal being right after the number, and I am going to move it 2 to the left. 1, 2. When I move it 2 to the left, my decimal point is now right here. So 16% written as a decimal is 16 hundredths. Okay, let's try another one. We are going to start with 42%. I'm going to drop my percent and put my decimal place in. Move 2 to the left, 1, 2. Now my decimal place is right here. So my answer is 42 hundredths. We can see we're simply moving the decimal place 2 to the left. I did here 2 to the left. All right, let's try one more. I have 133%. I'm going to drop the percent sign and just write it as a number. 133. Assume my decimal point is right here, and I'm going to move it 2 to the left. 1, 2. All right, moved it 2 to the left, and I can see that if I rewrite my number, my decimal point is now in between the 1 and 3. So 1 and 33 hundredths. My decimal started here, and I moved it to the left, so it ended up here. Awesome. Let's move on to the next problems. Okay, I'm going to skip down to the last chart, and then I'll go back up to this. So we're going to start by looking at decimal to a percent. So if I start here, my decimal is 45 hundredths. In order to convert to a percent, I simply move my decimal place 2 to the right. Okay? So 1, 2. Now my decimal place is here. So my answer is 45. And then I add my percent sign in. So 45 hundredths is 45%. Let's try the next one. I have 1 and 20 hundredths. I'm going to move my decimal place 2 to the right. Now it's right here. So my answer would be 120%. Let's try the last one. I'm going to move my decimal point 2 to the right. 1, 2. It's going to end up after the 8. I'm going to write that number 28 and add in my percent sign. So when I'm converting a number from a decimal to a percent, all I have to do is move my decimal point 2 to the right. Okay, now let's go back up to this chart. We have our fraction as a percent. Looking at my first fraction, you can see it's out of 100. Well, we know that per 100 means percent. So I'm going to just, per 100 means percent. And what number is it out of 100? It's 5. So my answer is 5%. Okay, moving on to this next one. It's a little bit trickier because my denominator is not 100. So for the first thing I need to do is convert this fraction to a decimal by dividing my numerator by my denominator. So if I go here, I have my numerator is 2, and I'm going to divide it by 3, and I get an answer of 0.666666666 going on forever. If I round that number to my nearest hundredth, it's 67 hundredths. So I'm going to put that answer in. Now that I have it as a decimal, I'm going to convert it to a percent, just like we were doing below. I move my decimal point 2 to the right, and now it's behind the 67. So my answer is 67%. Last one. Okay, again, I'm looking at this fraction, 4/5. 4 is my denominator, and oops, let me say that again. 4 is my numerator, 5 is my denominator. So I'm going to do 4 divided by 5. It's very important if you're using a calculator that you type in the number 4 first. So we have 4 divided by 5, and that gives me an answer of 0.8. Perfect. Now that this is written as a decimal, I need to convert it to a percent, and I do that by moving my decimal place 2 to the right. 1, 2. Oh, you can see I'm left with this empty space. What do I do with this empty space? Well, I put in a 0. Now I can see right here, my decimal place is after this 0 that I filled in. So I can go ahead and I can write my percent. It's equal to 80%. Okay? So here are all the problems we did. I hope that this helped explain it to you. And if you got anything wrong or you're confused, star it and come talk to me. All right?